You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, shut up and listen already, Doug Stack, over there in the chat room. He says, we'll start the show already. Remember, there's a 30-second delay from the time I hit go until you see it. So good to have you here, brother Doug. Glad to see you. Teresa, good to see you. I hear you were like Hemingway's at war with the osprey. You were, today? You were at war with the... what would you call them? The hydrangeas or the petunias or whatever they might be. Matt Finn, Brother Finn, Master Finn, good to see you. Glad you're here tonight. And Doug Stack, yeah, I see you there. It's great. It's good to see you, brother. And so let's get rolling here. And there's not many in the chat room yet. I'll say hi as people come in. It's Tuesday night. Tuesday, the supposed most productive day of the week. You know what? I'm sitting here and I'm talking away and my microphone is way up there. Sorry. Let's see. My kids do that. They come in here and they use my computer and then they mess with all my stuff. So there we go. All right. I got my mic down now. It was way up high. I don't know if the sound is any different, but it was, my mic was way up high. Out of reach, and I just noticed that. So, welcome to the show, Steph. Good to see you. Glad to have you here as well. And, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the stuff we talked about last night, as Scott Allen was commenting on this whole psychological flexibility. He thought that was a great term. And I said, you know what? Let's cover that a little bit more tomorrow night. And so we're going to talk about that a little tonight. Doug has no fire tonight. It's storming there down in Louisiana. So sorry to hear that, brother. And I hope you don't have storms like you had last year. So it's nice up here. We had a gorgeous day, about 70 degrees, low humidity, not a cloud in the sky, other than a couple of puffy ones that blew by. So it's a very nice day. It's been that way for about a week. We're about due for some rain or a storm or something like that. So, we're way up here in the north.
I brought you some watermelon.
You brought me watermelon. Come here. Say hi to everybody. Look what Ellie brought me. A plate of watermelon. It's hard to eat watermelon when I'm doing radio, though. So I'll set it right here, and I'll save it. Thank you, baby. That was very nice. Mwah. I appreciate that. There you go. A little familial interlude with watermelon. And it was a perfect day for watermelon up here. So, Doug, I'm sorry you're having storms. Glad to see you here. Steph, I'm glad to see you here. And Teresa and Master Finn and everybody else who's coming in. Good to see everybody else who's listening and hasn't appeared in the chat room. Good to have you here tonight. So we're going to do a little extension of last night and talk about some things. But before we do, there was something that kind of ran across my bow, and I wanted to present it. Now, as many of you know, Rainey and I, we're not necessarily spring and autumn or summer and winter difference in our marriage, in our ages in our marriage, but we have an age gap of about 19 and a half years. And we just say 20 to round it up nice and even. And with that age gap, there's always the question that people ask you, well, do you see any difference in that? And there are some differences, and I'm sure as I start to age a little more, those differences will come out. I know when Rainey and I met 16 years ago, we fit together. It was perfect. We looked good together. My age, I was early 40s, and she was early 20s, and we did all right. But as we start to get older, we start to say, does age really matter in a relationship? And there's some psychology behind that. You didn't know that, Teresa? Yeah, there's a 20-year difference between Rainey and me. And so why do they happen, age gap relationships? And when do they work? And why do they work? Age gap relationships, often called May-December relationships, they all face unique challenges. And heterosexual couples tend to have about a 3-year age difference, according to research and polls and things like that. So most people out there have on an average, about a 3-year age difference. Now, evolutionary psychology explains why men are usually older in heterosexual age gap relationships. Age is just a number, right? That's what everybody tells you. It's just a number. It's how you feel. And for some romantic couples, absolutely. They never think about their age as a factor in their compatibility. Of course, those kinds of couples tend to be close in age. Modest differences in age, especially when men are older, tend to not preoccupy couples as they develop their relationships. And yeah, Teresa, 20 years, 10 years, thanks. Yeah, I'm 60 and Rainey just turned 41. So we've got that 19 and a half year difference between us. And so for other couples, age is much more than a number. These age gap relationships, sometimes called May-December relationships, are comprised of one person who's markedly older than the other. And when a significant age gap exists between partners, age becomes a salient issue for them. And sometimes it's a deal breaker in the early stages of a relationship development. You know, I was never that much into dating younger women, but being where I was, I was at the festival and I was surrounded by women at the festival. I used to have a lot of younger women that we would hang out or we'd go out or we'd have drinks or whatever might happen. And I didn't get into a lot of those deep relationships because I felt there was such a huge difference. Now with Rainey, it was different. I met her when I was, as I said, when I was 44 and she was 24. And 24 seems awfully young to me nowadays. But of course, that was 16 years ago. And so age isn't like other characteristics. And I keep hailing back to Rainey and I, because that's the reason this question came up or why this topic came up in my mind. I wasn't out there looking for the topic. It just came across my bow and I thought, oh, now that's interesting. How many of you out there, and I don't know many of you in age different relationships with huge age gaps, but how many of you are in a relationship that has a huge age gap? Your relationship with your partner or somebody or the member of the opposite sex that's your partner. What's the age gap between you guys? Doug says, my wife is 3.5 years older, yet looks 10 years younger than me. There you go. That's kind of nice. And I love me some Mavis, says Steph. How's she doing, Joe? And Iowa Joe, how you doing? And Iowa Joe, you're not the same as Texas Joe, only with a different state in front of your name, are you? So that's who Iowa Joe is talking about. And let's see. Now you've heard the idea that birds of a feather flock together. And this maxim, it's generally true when it comes to love. People fall in love with others who are similar to them on a whole host of dimensions: educational background, values, political orientations, race, ethnicity, leisure interests, and you name it. Yet as robust as this pattern might be, age bucks the trend all the time. Research indicates that heterosexual couples tend to differ in age by about 3 years, and men tend to be older, usually. And now the standard 3-year age gap has a little bit of wiggle room before age becomes salient. And the larger the age gap, the more partners, and the public might take notice. Now, Rainey and I did that once many years ago. Maybe it was before we were even married. It was like, well, so how many women have you been with? She asked me. And I said, oh, a few. And I said, how many men you been with? She said 4. And I go, oh, 4, cool. And she says, no, I'm serious. How many? And she started naming off the ones she knew of. And it ended up, my number was quite a bit higher than hers. But that's because I was older than she was. And maybe had different values. I don't know. Hey, Gaza, good to see you. Glad you're here tonight. And so, hey, Ryan Gale. Ryan says, I don't think I would have a lot in common with somebody 20 years my junior. I said that too, Ryan, and this is back, you and I have known each other longer than I've known Rainey, Ryan. We were in the regiment together back in, I can't remember, was it 98? We went through this once before, 98 to 2000, right in that range. And I met Rainey in 2004, started dating her in 2005. So there was a big age difference. But the funny thing is, I didn't notice the age difference on an intellectual level. Now, maybe that's as I'm immature or something, or I think like a 24-year-old. I don't know what it was, and I don't mean that as any slam against Rainey, but I saw Rainey entered the picture and was brilliant, a brilliant thinker, and we got along great. I fell in love with her amazingly, mentally, intellectually, physically, all those things that matter to people. And like I say, I was 20 years older than she was. And so age differences can sometimes make people feel uncomfortable. And age gaps between partners can generate self-consciousness about one's relationship, concerns that the relationship won't work, hypersensitivity toward others' ideas about the appropriateness of a relationship. I didn't give a flying rat's ass what anybody thought about the age difference between Rainey and I. And for the most part, there were a lot of people that didn't really pay it much, never mind. I think people knew I was older than her. I don't think they noticed that there was a huge age gap difference between us. And so in these cases, age gaps are observable, obvious. A 15-year span, a 25-year span. Those are noticeable sometimes. And according to the Today Show, Catherine McPhee wasn't anticipating a positive public reaction to her relationship with David Foster, who was 35 years her senior. George Clooney has similarly confessed to Howard Stern that he didn't think his now wife Amal would be interested in him because he's 17 years older. I dated a woman for 4 years before Rainey that was 16 years younger than I am. Now, those are the only two people in my life that were younger women than I was. And so the negative societal response to age gap relationships may reflect people's objections to unfair, inequitable relationships. Now, evidence suggests that prejudice tied to age gap relationships is accounted for by the belief that one person, the older person, is reaping more rewards from the relationship than the other person. I always got, and you get this more from guys, but I always got, hey, that Rainey's pretty hot. She's a lot younger than you. Dog you. Fist bump, high five. You bagged a woman 20 years younger than you. That's the kind of stuff I put up with. And, as I began to fall in love with Rainey, it's like, I don't like that kind of talk. And that talks down to her for me. Well, anyway, now perhaps observers respond negatively to these May-December relationships because they feel as though the older person is taking advantage of the younger person. Now, what ways do you think an older person could take advantage of a younger person? How do they do that? I would think that it would be looked at the other way around, that the younger person is taking advantage of the older person, somebody who's more set, maybe more stable in perception, financially stable, things like that. So I'm looking here. Amanda says, still an 8-year-old butt. Let's see. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. Reef's dad is 10 years, my elder. There you go. These differences can help energize a relationship too, said Teresa. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, it was common for men to take very young wives. Sure. Yeah, it was. They were often married off to men that were 40 years older than them. Yeah, that was, to establish them, to give the, remember when we were talking about David, David had younger women. King David, when he was dying, he was old and stricken in years, it says, probably into his 70s, mid-70s to late 70s. For the times, very old, for an old ancient warrior. And they got him a young woman to lie in bed with him to get him heat, as the Old English says. So Age preferences are embedded into our mating psychology. How we think about age in romantic relationships isn't arbitrary. Rather, it's a crucial factor for shaping how we approach relationships, according to evolutionary psychology. Now, evolutionary psychology is based on the premise that the human mind has evolved adaptive strategies to support the reproductive and the survival. And along these lines, ancestrally, women benefited by seeking men who had the status and the resources to support their child rearing, much like what Teresa just referred to in the 1700s. These traits are tied to older men. And men, meanwhile, had evolved a preference for younger women because their youth is a signal for fertility, virility, and over eons and eons, men have better reproductive success when they partner with women who can bear children. Yeah, having reproductive success usually requires a woman who can bear a child. And so that's the way that turned out. Hey, Scott Allen, good to see you. Nice to have you in here. Doug says, Gaza, when I was 18, I had a 27-year-old girlfriend. Thought I hit the jackpot. I saw her picture recently. I did win the jackpot when I got out of Dodge. When I was 17 years old and a freshman in college, I was dating for a while a girl who was a senior in college. I say girl now because 22 years old is very young to me right now. And so I was 17, she was 22, and we dated. It was a torrid love affair that didn't last very long. I also one time dated a woman I was 28 and she was 36. And I thought that was very much a difference. But so it happens. We do those things sometimes. Now, by the way, this explains why women prefer and tend to marry slightly older men and why men tend to prefer and marry slightly younger women. With this age gap increases as men age. And large age gap relationships, therefore, often reflect men's evolved preferences for younger, more fertile women, and women's evolved preferences for older, high-status men. Now, much to Rainey's chagrin, I was not as high status as she thought I was. I just looked like I had a lot of money. Now, Rainey didn't marry me for money. She knew long before we got married that I wasn't made of money. But I think there was a status there that subconsciously the evolutionary cycle gets. And for me, I'd already had 3 children. I wasn't really looking for a young woman who could reproduce. But as guys, we like young women. And I hate to say that to women my own age, maybe both are true, is that some women looked at me and said, there's lots of women your age that you could be dating. And I said, yeah, but I haven't met one I liked yet. Not liked as a friend, disliked as a friend, but one I didn't like. I didn't see myself with them. Rainey came along and it's like, holy crap, this is what I want. And so, yeah, Steph, there's that high status that women sometimes, and I'm not saying they're not gold digging. It's part of the evolutionary process. They look for men with high status, men that can provide for them. Sometimes a woman who's 22 years old meets a guy who's 22 years old and doesn't know what the hell he wants. Guys at 22 are goofy. But sorry if you're 22 or thereabouts and I just insulted you. But the ideal age gap and direction, older men, might reflect health outcomes. Even if men tend to just be slightly older, we all know how many different sex couples where the age difference is not only wide, but also opposes that which is expected by evolutionary psychology. In other words, we know couples in which women are substantially older than their partners. Consider, again, celebrities, Nick Jonas and Priyanka Chopra, who is 10 years his senior. 10 years. That's such a big difference. Doesn't seem that bad to me. Or Madonna's boyfriend, who was 35 years older than her. Oddly enough, women do tend to be older than their partners among the youngest couples, a reverse of the classic age gap trend. Now, looking at birth data in the US among couples younger than 25, fathers tended to be slightly younger than the mothers. Now, this age gap quickly reverses in older age cohorts, with men in their early and mid 40s and early mid 50s having children with women in their mid 30s, which is more than 20 years younger, oh my God, than themselves for the older age group. So thus the general pattern that men are older and only somewhat older seems to stand, making age gap relationships kind of unusual. And so the ideal 3-ish year age gap with men older than women observed cross-culturally might reflect its optimal selective fitness. Data have suggested that regardless of maternal age, infant health is highest, or survival rate, when the age gap is male older and only slight. And in relationships where women are substantially older than their partners, infant health outcomes are not as strong, even compared to same-age women. And these data never, this novel data point to the origin of why the age gap is such a robust cross-cultural trend. Let's see. Steph says, call me greedy, but if I'm pleasing, I wanted to be pleased also without having to give directions. And there you go. Maybe sometimes it's the man who has a little bit of knowledge and knows what he's doing. Like I used to have a phrase, and it was in Latin. I don't think I can find it. I can't even remember the Latin, but a phrase that went with my character at the festival in Latin. I can't quote it anymore. I've got it in writing somewhere, but it meant, translated to English, let go of my ears. I know what I'm doing. So older men, we know what we're doing, is the supposedly the preconception sometimes. So I'm right there with you, Steph. I get what you mean. Slightly Slanted Sleuth, good to see you. I think women are moving up in financial and power via job markets, so it's changing. I think you're right. Master Finn says sometimes you don't need the exploration and want to get on with the experimentation. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, frankly, I've been burned that way. I remember having some hot young woman want to take me to bed, and took me to bed. Then I find out after, I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And the hot young woman was like, I just was experimenting. I wanted to see what it was like to be with an older man. And I'm like, that's it? That's all you got? And it was like, okay, well, gee, thanks, I think. I'll leave the money on the nightstand. That's what you almost wanted to say. You have to release your ears from my ankles. There it is, Steph. Corey, good to see you, brother. Glad you made it in. And we're talking about age gap before we get into the main topic of the night. So you have to assess the viability of an age gap relationship. Sure, age gap relationships might require becoming comfortable with or ignoring other people's snippy comments, but many age gap relationships can thrive. I had a very dear friend of mine, a good friend, and his wife. They said, Scotty, we just kind of wonder why are you dating women? Why aren't you dating women your age? What's with all the younger women? I was told, and that was, I'd only dated one young woman. This was before I met Rainey, and I'd only dated the one. But I showed up at a gathering of theirs with a friend of mine who became my roommate, who was Rainey's age now. So, gosh, she was 20 years younger than I was. And this was about 18 years ago. And I showed up at this gathering, and she came along with me. And she got up to go to the bathroom, and my friend goes, what's with you and all the younger women? I go, what's with all the young? I said, we're not really dating. I said, she's a friend. She's going to rent the extra room in my house. And we hung out. We knew each other. We still do. We're still good friends. And she's good friends with Rainey. And so those questions would get thrown at you. People will look at you. Wow, you're stealing the cradle. And Rainey would say, no, I'm robbing the grave. So there you go. Matt Finn says, I will say you can equally dominate, just not at the same time. Yeah, there it is. There's that. So Teresa settled for that boring equality. And money's on the dresser, baby. I'm through with you, says Matt Finn. I will say you can equally dominate. Okay, I saw that one. So here, there's 4 questions you have to ask when it comes to this age gap thing. No matter what the flippant remarks you get or the snippy comments or whatever. Number 1, you have to ask yourself, is this a short-term or a long-term relationship? So the fun of a short-term fling might outweigh the challenges that might come with navigating long-term compatibility. Older partners might enjoy the vitality and the physical attractiveness of a younger partner, and younger partners can benefit from the status, money, and knowledge of older partners. Sure, that's in the short term. How about the long term? Now, you guys can correct me. You've seen enough of Rainey. I don't think we come across as being incompatible. I don't think we come across like there's a huge gap in our age. Unless you look at us, you can see she's younger, prettier, all of that good stuff. I'm older, and it's starting to show. It's wasn't as obvious 16 years ago. A lot more obvious now. Got a few more years. Like I say, it's not the years, honey. It's the mileage. And so you got to look at it for the long term or the short term. Number 2, do you share the same long-term goals? Now, I remember when, and I've said this before when talking about relationships, I remember when Rainey and I started to get a little more serious. I said, I've already had 3 kids, and I wasn't supposed to be able to father children at all, biologically. I had a little problem with that. I didn't produce enough soldiers to storm the beach, so to speak. And yet, when I had my twin daughters, I thought they were miracles. And it was 9 years later with a very, might I add, just for the sake of the story, a very sexually prolific wife at the time. It was 9 years before my son Sam came along. And so I thought, when Rainey and I started to get serious, maybe six years later after my divorce from my ex-wife, I was like, we're getting kind of serious. I want you to know you're young, younger than I am. You've never had kids, and I've already had kids. And the likelihood as I get older, I think, is going to be even more diminished because I had problems to begin with. And soldiers to storm the beach, Scott Allen. That's right. And so, but of course, what was Rainey's answer? She was young. We were both younger and in love. And it's like, I don't care. That's okay. And of course, we got married and it was bing, bang, boom. We had the 3 kids. And so that's why I'm 60 with a 6-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old daughter and a just about 12-year-old son. And, but Rainey's 41. She's a great mom. She's right in that category. So do you share those same long-term goals? Kids for us was a long-term goal. We decided we both are okay with it. And long-term relationships of any nature are more successful when couples want the same things. We both wanted somebody to love. We both wanted to be loved. We both wanted to be together. We had a good time being together. That's why we got married. And because of many life goals are age-linked, the question of shared goals can be more pressing for age gap couples. Is one of you working when the other one wants to retire? Do you want to spend your weekends in the same way? Now, I found there's a little bit of that with Rainey and I. There's a little bit of that age gap that shows between us. You know why? I don't have the same kind of energy I had. Now, part of that true is I'm out of shape. I had open heart surgery, a heart attack, and all that 4 years ago. And a couple little heart attacks in between. I've had a hip replaced already. And I felt I was young at age 40, having to get a hip replaced. I'm sorry, not 40. Where'd that number come from? I don't know. I was 55, when I had the hip replaced. Older than that, 56, 57. I thought I was too young to have hip replacements. But all of that to say, Rainey and I noticed some of that. Rainey's got all this stuff she does with the kids, all these activities. And there's times like, hey, we got a camping trip with the kids next weekend for Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts. I'm like, oh, great. Camping on the ground. That'll be fun. My body doesn't take it as well as it used to. It's like I said, I can do all the things I used to do. It just hurts more. And Rainey's 20 years my younger. When I was 41, God, I was like I was 20. So my body is aged. My mind, not so much. So these things change. And if you're in that long-term relationship, discussions about whether you want children, biological, adopted, fostered, that can be especially important. And certainly this is a discussion that partners in all long-term relationships benefit from having, but age gap relationships might face particular challenges. I look right now, I will be 72 years old. 72. When my youngest child, Ellery, age 6, graduates from high school. I'll be 72. And hope to God I'm still going to be very active at 72. That I'm not going to be a doddering old man with all my pieces falling off. I want to still have my wife look at me and go, yeah, let's go. She'll be 51. I'll be 72. Let's go, honey. Here, wait. Let me get the hip oiled up. So older women with young men, this is all challenges. There's challenges in these kinds of relationships. Older women with younger men are less likely to be able to have a biological child and or maybe uninterested in parenting young children into their 40s or their 50s. Now, Rainey, we had our kids young for her. I mean, like I say, she was what? She was 27 years old when we were married in 2007. She's 41 now. We've got our first child was born 2008, 2 years later. Flynn came along. So she had a child at 28, 29 years old. And now Flynn she's pushing 12 and she's 41. And we've got children down to 6. So she's not as young as she used to be, although she holds it very well. Now, older men may likewise be wary of having a child, knowing that they're going to be older when their children are teens. That's the one regret I have about being a little older than Rainey is my kids. Can I go out and play football with my kids? Yeah, a little bit. I can throw it around. I feel like my body is more breakable than it was 20 years ago, though. That bugs me a little bit. So you know what that does for me? It increases my desire to be in shape and to stay in shape and to get into better shape than I'm in. So these are important conversations to broach when a relationship is expected to be long-term. Now, the fourth one is, do you have your friends' support? Now, our friends and family play a role in our relationship success, and whether we wish them to or not, in general, when friends approve of relationships, they help sustain them. Whereas their disapproval can be accompanied by behaviors that make it harder for us to feel invested in our relationships. Age gap relationships are often very stigmatized by friendships. But if friends and family approve, the relationship becomes easier to sustain. Now, I can say outright, Rainey's mom doesn't like me. I don't think she liked me from the moment Rainey introduced me to her, and she found out I was 4 years older than my mother-in-law, my then-to-be mother-in-law. And we still don't have a good relationship. It's not there. It's cordial. Let's put it that way. And my mother-in-law is 56. I'm 60. And that's never been a strong tie. When you hear, I've talked about this before, you hear that Rainey goes off to the family a lot. I don't go to those family things. I'm just not. Her family's never really quite accepted me as well as they could. And whereas my mom, who's fairly young, my mom's only 18 years younger than I am, older than I am, sorry. She looks at Rainey and she said, Rainey's the best thing that ever happened to you. When Rainey and I started getting serious, my mom said, don't you screw this one up. And I said, I won't. I don't intend to. Although I almost have before. So my family was very accepting of Rainey. But they're not around. My mom's out of state and my family's out of state, so on. So blah, 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 all that to say. Friendships and family mean an awful lot when you have these kinds of relationships. So chronological age might tick, tick, tick upward. But people's perceived age and felt age might matter more for the success of the relationship. Partners with significant age gaps might be better matched in terms of their shared interests, their vitality, their energy, their health than many same-aged couples. So ultimately, the day-to-day emotions, the thoughts, the behaviors that define a relationship are known only by those in the relationship, not by nosy outsiders. So when partners are well-suited, regardless of their age gap, they can have a strong, satisfying partnership. And so I'm going to tell you, I believe my relationship with Rainey, though it is there's a huge age gap between us, I don't think it's a detriment. I think we get along well with each other and we do all right. Let's see. Steph says, well, that's what the monster-in-laws do. I, however, love my son-in-law. He's a good kid. He took my daughter and all the baggage, not much, that she has. That's good. Kevin Miller said, my grandfather had 5 kids when his wife left him. He married a girl 14 years younger than him and had 6 more kids. His oldest daughter was only 7 years younger than his new wife. So, yeah, there you go, Kevin. And, Rainey walked into this relationship with me back in 2005. And Sam was 4, my now 20-year-old, the great leprechaun, my son Sam. He was 4 when Rainey came into our lives. My daughters were 13. And I remember a scene vividly, and I told you all there's a much longer story to this, but my ex-wife left the kids she was supposed to take with her that weekend and tore out of the driveway, flipping me off out the window. And Rainey's holding Sam. He's crying. And she picked him up and she's holding him. And Rainey saw that and still wanted to be with me. And that was at the very beginning. That was as our relationship was forming in 2005. And so, we know we're compatible with each other. We know it works. So Corey says, I like my girls a little bit older. And his tongue's hanging out. Corey, suck that tongue back into your face. So Steve Clark, good to see you, brother. Glad you're here tonight. Corey Blake, glad you're here. Steph, Matt Finn, everybody. You know what we're going to do? Elderberry, good to see you. Field Guy, glad you made it in. Good to see you, brother. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a Mary Wins. Good to see you as well. Glad you're here. And so all of you over there in the chat room, we're going to boogie out of here for about a minute and a half. So you all sit tight, and we're going to be right back right after this.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Let's see. Field Guy says, my mom never liked anyone I dated, so I said F it and stopped dating. Field Guy, you didn't stop seeing women because your mom didn't like it, did you? Come on, man. Come on, man. I don't think there was anyone that I dated that my mom didn't like. I did find out sometimes afterwards, if I obviously broke up with that woman eventually, my mom would say, oh, I'm so glad you two broke up because I did not like her at all. So my older kid's mother, who I've talked about before, we broke up once and then we got back together. And my mom was like, I can't believe you're doing this. She said, I'm really against this. And then the first time I brought her back to my mom's house, my mom was like, welcomed her with open arms and said, welcome back to the family. And my mom always treated her right. But then, of course, that did not last but a few more years. And it was over. And my mom was like, I was so thankful you guys broke up. Now, that's the ex-wife I've talked about. That's the woman from whom I was given sole custody of my 3 kids. That tells you something about her. So, yeah, I get that. So, Field Guy, we're just giving you a hard time. So, don't ever let your mom tell you who you can and can't date. But sometimes moms have some insight. Rainey's mom was wrong to not like me. That's all I can say. So let's move on. Welcome back to the program, folks. We're going to go on and we're going to talk about a couple of other things here. And, I talked about the other night, and it was Scott Allen. See you there in the chat room. You had mentioned outright that that's interesting, you said, when I mentioned psychological flexibility. And so I thought we'd talk about that a little bit tonight and what it is. And we're already officially three quarters through with the show. Well, let's see if we can hit some of this. So what is psychological flexibility? Now, by the way, this show sometimes runs like a magazine. You pick up a magazine and it's got on the cover, the big cover article, such and you find you have to wade 72 pages into the magazine before you hit the cover story. That's kind of what we do on here sometimes. Sometimes it's even the next day before we get there. But what is psychological flexibility? Being psychologically flexible is the ability to make contact with experience in the present moment fully without defense. So being psychologically flexible allows you to stay rooted in the present moment when difficult thoughts, feelings, sensations arise. And it enables you to take a much more broader approach, a more holistic view of any situation you might find yourself in that involve your emotions, your fluctuating thoughts. And so instead of basing your decisions and your actions on the fluctuating thoughts and emotions of the moment, like, oh my God, my mom doesn't like her or him or whatever, you can choose your response according to your deeply held values and your long-term vision for your own life. That's in a nutshell what psychological flexibility is. You're not going to be moved necessarily from what you know to be true and right and good because the things around you want to drag your emotions or your actions in one way or the other. So psychological flexibility, people who are psychologically flexible are skilled at taking on feedback and perspectives from other people and recognizing when their approach to solving a problem might need to be changed. They know that by changing their actions, they're likely to get different results. So they're flexible sometimes in their approach to achieving what they want in life. They don't buy into rigid thinking. They don't buy into dogma necessarily, or doing things a certain way simply because that's the way it's always been done. They're also characterized by being able to shift their perspective fluidly between the present moment and the future. You've got the ability to do that. So in other words, it doesn't matter what's going on around you and the shifting in all your emotions. You're able to push the shifting emotions aside and say, I can be flexible when I need to. I can be rigid when I need to. Now, a good example of psychological flexibility in action comes from this story. There was a story of how there was a certain professor, Adam Grant, who improved his public speaking skills. And he said this: when I was in grad school, a friend asked me to give a guest lecture for her class. I was terrified of public speaking, but I wanted to be helpful. So I agreed, and I figured it'd be a good learning opportunity. So after the class, I handed out a feedback form asking how I could improve. It was brutal. One student wrote that I was so nervous I was causing the class to physically shake in their seats. And my authentic self was not a fan of public speaking, but I started volunteering to give more lectures, knowing it was the only way to get better. And I wasn't being true to myself. I was being true to the self I wanted to become. Boom. There it is. I had something very similar. Public speaking was very difficult for me at first, but I loved theater. And theater was the thing that helped me overcome some of my roadblocks to public speaking. Now, you notice in this little story I told you, the guy didn't base his actions on his thoughts or his emotions of the moment. Instead, he took a course of action that, although emotionally challenging and painful, was based on his values, helping his friend and improving. And his long-term vision for his life. Fast forward a few years, and this guy, Grant, is one of the most prolific communicators in psychology, with his TED Talks being viewed more than 20 million times. And so, there's something I think of, and I've mentioned it here before. This is something that I've mentioned before in relation to my son. In the animated movie Treasure Planet, which is a science fiction animated retelling of Treasure Island. There's a scene in the movie where Jim Hawkins, the young lad, is led to believe that he caused the death of some other crew members. And he is totally beside himself, totally discouraged. And he says, it's my fault. And he's ready to quit. And John Silver looks at him and he says, now you listen to me, James Hawkins, he says. You got the makings of greatness in you, but you got to take the helm and chart your own course. Stick to it, no matter the squalls. And when the time comes, you get the chance to really test the cut of your sails and show what you're made of. Well, I hope I'm there, catching some of the light coming off you that day. And it uplifted this Jim Hawkins character. And so when you start to look at this, you see that you can change your course of action. You have the ability to change who you are and what you are and things that you've done to become something better in hopes of becoming something greater. And sometimes the people around you that help build you up in that are the people that help you see that. That's psychological flexibility. So what's it built upon, this psychological flexibility? It's based on relational frame theory. That's RFT, if you want to look that up. Relational frame theory, which now has over 150 peer-reviewed articles supporting its principles. In a nutshell, RFT suggests that human beings, we all learn language in terms of relationships, and not just by association, as was previously thought. It's not just association, it's relationship. This means that when we learn something new, It's placed in a neural network in our minds, and it's related to other pre-existing nodes in that network. RFT is complex. It's a complex theory. But the key point is you can't remove or delete thoughts from a network once they've been put there, as many approaches try to do. There's no such thing as unlearning. One of the great, now kind of older films was, remember What the Bleep Do We Know? I think it was called. It's all based on The Secret and things like that. We're talking about how our brains build neural nets. We have memory is permanent. It's always there. It's creased into your brain. Some of those memories we forget, but they're still there deep down inside. Some of them we reinforce because we constantly think about them and constantly reinforce the actions behind them. And we build and build and build, and pretty soon that neural net latches onto another neural net and it starts building a bigger net. So the key point is you can't remove or delete thoughts from a network once it's there. You can't unlearn them. Doing so is like trying to unweave a vast spider's web of infinite connections. In the book A Liberated Mind, Professor Hayes tells the story of how he used to suffer from panic attacks and the approach he used to treat his anxiety. He'd listen to relaxation tapes that would get him to repeat things like, "I'm calm, I'm relaxed," over and over again. And later, when he was in situations that made him feel on edge, he would repeat, "I'm calm, I'm relaxed," and try to get rid of the anxiety and induce a more relaxed state of mind. However, there was a problem. The phrase calm and relaxed had now become linked with anxiety in his brain and panic attacks in his mind. They were in the same neural network. It's like, again, like that, if you remember that old episode of MASH, when Charles Emerson Winchester III, he was playing Bach or some classical music on an old phonograph to the South Koreans. And he was teaching, and then they all got killed when their Jeep got blown up. And he went and he smashed all his records. He says, "Something that I once loved has now become, will ever be a constant reminder of these young men and their loss of life for me." And so this is that neural network that gets built up. So therefore, Hayes, in telling himself that he was calm and relaxed, it led him to thinking about anxiety, which in turn provoked intense panic attacks. So paradoxically, his attempts to soothe himself were leading to the problem he was trying to avoid. And this is actually quite a common phenomenon in psychology, referred to as relaxation-induced anxiety. So if the problem can't be solved by attempting to remove thoughts from our neural networks, what are we going to do? How do we solve that problem? The key, Hayes argues, is that it's not what we think or feel that counts. It's how we relate to what we think or feel that matters. In other words, the important thing is not the neural networks themselves, but our relationship to those networks. People with high levels of psychological flexibility have a healthy relationship with their neural networks, while people with low levels don't. And so, for instance, if psychologically flexible people feel anxious, they don't try to fight it or run from it, as they know it can aggravate the problem. Instead, they embrace that this is what they're experiencing right now in the moment. They acknowledge it, they claim it, they bag it, they tag it, and they choose their response to it with bigger picture or vision, values, etc. in mind. Thus, the feeling itself doesn't change, only our relationship to the feeling. So as a result, feelings and thoughts have less power to dictate to us their behavior, and they gain more control over their lives. So the big question then comes in, how can you develop psychological flexibility? Steve Clark said, my mom used to bug me when I was young if I was going to get married. When I got older, I kept saying no until one night, yes. And then I'm going to marry a Swede. I did too at 39 years of age. So how we react to, that's right, Teresa. So how do you develop psychological flexibility? It's like anything. It's like weightlifting. It's like exercising. Acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT. ACT. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy that aims to help people live a rich, full, and meaningful life while accepting the pain and the difficulties that are inevitably going to arise sometimes on a daily basis in our lives, all along the way. ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy, is essentially informed and helps individuals get in touch with the big picture and their core values in life. Questions like, what do you want to be remembered for at your funeral? And what do you really stand for? Are taken into consideration. These are core values. And they're used to guide decision-making in our lives, our daily actions. They inspire our behaviors. They inspire our behavior to change. ACT involves 6 core therapeutic processes, which are designed to reduce psychological rigidity and help people develop psychological flexibility skills. Developers and practitioners of ACT, such as Dr. Russ Harris, stress that the 6 processes are interdependent and they rely on each other. It's more useful to think of them as 6 facets of one diamond, and the diamond itself is psychological flexibility. So in other words, just focusing on 1 or 2 doesn't work. If you want to develop this psychological flexibility, the 6 core processes need to be practiced in tandem. Let's look at each one real quickly here. It's already 2 minutes till the technical end of the show. We'll go on. We shall go on. Here we go. Matt Finn says, any more in this world, I ask myself, are these the feelings or thoughts formulated on my own, or ones sculpted by decades of others' narrative? Bam, boom. And they're not sculpted by others, Matt. We sculpt them ourselves by allowing what other people say have influence in the way we think. So here's the 6 things. We'll try to do these briefly so we don't go too long here. Here's 6 core processes that are needed to be practiced all together or not at all. 1, contacting the present moment. Be here in the now. Does that spark anything in the back of your brain? When we were talking about being awake, being aware, not woke, of course. Woke is foolish. Being awake and aware. We talked about this over a year ago. Awake and aware that you're awake and in the now. So number 1, the one facet to start with is contacting the present moment. Be here in the now. As human beings, we have a tendency to spend a disproportionate amount of our time ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. You ever notice that? We live in the here and the now. We're here now. All of us are right now in this moment. But how many of us are plagued by all the shit that's taken place before in our pasts? And how many of us are worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month or August 31st? So we spend a disproportionate amount of time not being present in the moment, in the here, in the now, not being awake. And this often leads to a great deal of unnecessary suffering. We worry about the past. We worry about the future. We ruminate about the past and worry about the future. In addition, many of us often find ourselves in autopilot mode, which means we're unconsciously acting out preconditioned patterns from our past. We are who we've been made to be in this present moment. And we're constantly acting those things out. And you know what? Breaking out of those molds and those patterns is really tough. So contacting the present moment involves bringing your awareness out of these unconscious patterns and into the here and the now, the moment, now, today, here, so that you can fully experience what's going on inside of you psychologically and in the world around you, exopsychologically, so to speak. Teresa says, so I deal with my now in my space. Exactly, Teresa. It's not ego. No. Screw tomorrow because it ain't here yet, says slightly slanted sleuth. Well, you know, fuck yesterday and screw tomorrow. Yeah, I get that. We have to have some attachment to those things. What we can't do is allow those things to govern who we are in the present. And the present is always here and now. So that's the first one. That first one, contacting the present moment. Number 2, diffusion. Watch the way you think. Another unfortunate tendency of the human mind is to identify with our thoughts. In a sense, to fuse those things with who we are. We do this not realizing that the thoughts in our head are merely words and images that we've picked up from the world around us. As a result of being fused with our thinking, we take the words and the symbols that are bouncing around in our minds way too seriously. And this can get us into trouble. For example, if you have an overly negative inner critic who's constantly telling you that you're no good, then this can have some detrimental effects on your mental health and your well-being. Diffusion, it's like diffusing a bomb, pulling the fuse out. Diffusion enables you to create some distance between your awareness and your thoughts, which are two different things. Being aware, being awake and in the now and aware is different than your feelings. It's different than your thoughts. So that you take them lightly and you don't get caught up in the craziness of your thinking. Therefore, when a thought pops up, good or bad, you can watch it come and go, rather than getting sucked into a cognitive vortex that takes you on this wild goose chase around the infinite networks of your mind. So, contacting the present moment, diffusion, watch your thinking. 3, acceptance, open up. Acceptance is the ability to open up to the difficult thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that arise within you. Instead of trying to fight them or run away from them, which often does more harm than good to us, let them be allowed to be as they are and give them some breathing space. Paradoxically, when you accept these negative experiences, you take their power away. That's the first 3. Number 4, self as context. Self as context. This is pure awareness. ACT divides the mind into 2 distinct elements: the thinking self and the observing self. The thinking self is part of us, involved with planning, solving problems, judging, fantasizing, etc. That's the thinking part of who we are. The observing self is you as pure awareness. This is the part of you that's aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your actions in any given moment. It's the you that's been there your whole life. Think about it this way: as you pass through life, going from a toddler to a child to a teenager to an adult to an elderly person, your body's going to change. Your thoughts are going to change. Your roles will change. But there's an aspect of you, an observing self, that remains constant throughout everything. So according to ACT, the more you take the perspective of observing self, the more psychologically flexible you are. You get that? So this ACT, what is that again? Acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy. So acceptance. When you accept the negative experiences, you take their power away. And there's these two distinct elements, the self as context, pure awareness. The more you take the perspective of observing self, the more psychologically flexible you're going to be. Number 5, values. In other words, know what the hell matters. Values. Values are defined as desired qualities of ongoing action. In other words, your values are your chosen life directions that describe how you want to act in the world on an ongoing basis. They can usually be expressed using verbs, adverbs, such as giving gratefully, listening emphatically, living courageously, exploring adventurously, things like that. So according to the ACT model, getting clear on your values is vital for living a meaningful life. It's all about identifying what's the most important things to you and then using that knowledge to guide you in day-to-day life. So these following questions here could be really helpful in clarifying your values. 1, what do you want to be remembered for at your funeral? As dumb a question as that might seem. What do you want to be remembered for when you're gone? 2, what would you like your obituary to say? He was a great guy. Are they going to interview people on the news after you die and go, well, we always thought he was a really good guy. He was quiet and raked his yard a lot, and he was a good man or woman. That's usually when you're a mass murderer and they find out after you die. But what would you like your obituary to say? 3, deep down, what really matters to you in the big picture? What matters? Number 4, if you already had $1 billion in the bank, how would you spend your time? What would you do? So what really matters is the big question. And sometimes getting to that point in life is the hard step to take. We have to realize that there's things more important than what we're striving and fighting about. It's got to be, what do we want in the big picture? Where do we want to be? So in short, values are like a compass that point you true north, giving you direction and providing guidance for all your daily actions. Teresa says, it's not up to us to save them. Let's see, she's saying in all caps here. I want to see this. I don't create them or their emotions or their faults, says Teresa. That's enabling them. It's not up to us to save them. We can only decide our responses to them. Teresa goes on to say, yes, they live to criticize, condemn, and complain. So my energy goes elsewhere. That's it. It's that thing of saying, those people who, I'm using this more as an example, the people who criticize me, sometimes it bothers me. Other times I'm able to step outside that. I'm able to separate myself from the feeling and say, you know what? Doesn't matter what people think. It's what I do and how I live. It's the values I set. I can't be controlled by what somebody else thinks. Right now, the sixth thing in this whole thing, this multifaceted diamond, this 6 core processes that need to work if we want to be psychologically flexible. 1 was contacting the present moment, being in the here and now. Diffusion, watching your thinking. Acceptance, opening up. Self as context, pure awareness. Values, knowing what really matters to us. And then finally, 6, committed action. Do what it takes. A compass is no good if you stay at home and stare at it all day. There's north. Phew. That's the right direction. That's north. Whew. Great. Cool. I can sit here and watch this now. Direction. There it is. Compass is pointing north. Oh, look. It's still pointing north. Oh, yeah. That's great. no matter where I move. I don't even have to get out of my chair. You ever done that? A compass is no good if you stay at home and just stare at it all day. As the name suggests, committed action refers to embodying our values with integrity and acting them out in day-to-day life, even if it's painful, if it's inconvenient, if it's uncomfortable to do so. Living in alignment with your values may involve saying no to things, and it's unlikely to win you approval in the short term. For example, I once invited a speaker to give a talk at our Paradigm Symposium. And we offered a pretty good deal for this person to do this. Although part of him wanted to give the presentation, he said no, because it was a value for him to keep. Sundays work free so he could spend time with his family. So he didn't want to come in for the weekend. So so that's an example. He had his own personal core values. I might disagree with them or have my own that are different, but he had his. So although the core processes have been discussed, we've discussed them here, it's important to keep in mind that they do not exist in isolation. It's the most helpful to think of them as 6 facets of a psychological flexibility diamond that are interdependent and to be practiced in tandem with one another. So, for instance, you can't take committed action, number 6, unless you're clear on your values, number 5. And it's difficult to practice diffusion, number 2, unless you're able to contact the present moment, number 1. So if you're interested in discovering how flexible you are, put these things into practice and see what they do for you. So that is psychological flexibility, which we mentioned very quickly yesterday. We were talking about fostering psychological flexibility in our lives, how to be happy. Remember, yesterday's topic was all about instilling great happiness in yourself and your relationship. And I said it's easy to rigidly want what you want and to make demands. But research suggests that couples and families do so much better when people practice psychological flexibility, the 6-faceted diamond. Being open, aware, considering the context, keeping perspective all along the way, and reducing negativity and not escalating the problems. Unfortunately, psychological flexibility can be developed with practice. Practice, practice. So guys, there you go. It's 10:13. I think we got through all the material I wanted to hit tonight. I see there's lots of discussion in the chat room. We can go through this for a minute. I want to see what people are saying. Try not to take out your bad day on the others, says Corey Blake. Absolutely. Matt Finn says people with the worst criticisms often have the least amount of self-awareness in his humble opinion. I agree. Slightly Slanted Sleuth said critics are truly concerned with the failings in themselves. At least I was, he said. And do you notice that the people who criticize you for things are usually the people who are criticizing you for things that they see in themselves? Keep that in mind. Some of your strongest critics, they're projecting their own shit onto you. Sleuth says truest truth is indifferent. It's true whether we like it or not. And there is one truth, else all be false. So you're absolutely spot on. Truth is not malleable. It doesn't change. There are some absolutes in the universe. So, thanks for understanding, you guys. My exam and Saturday. Woohoo, says Teresa Downtown. So good work tonight, everyone. Corey Blake says. Thanks, Corey. Always a little understanding goes a long way. Let's see. Wonderful conversation, says Matt Finn. There we go, folks. Let's leave it at that for tonight. We're all done. I want to thank you for being here. I want to encourage you to develop this flexible psychology within yourself. Become psychologically flexible. It's a great way to learn to live. Hey, Michelle McCann McFree. Good to see you. Projection, transference. Yep. Scapegoating. Yeah, exactly. That's what we were talking about. All right, guys. That's it. That's all I got. Scott Allen, I see you waving at the end there. Hopefully, this hit something on the head for you, because last night you're the one who made me think maybe we should talk about this tomorrow night. So I hope that this helped everybody. Certainly helps me. All right, guys, that's it. I appreciate your being here. Love y'all. Don't love you all the way I love my wife and kids, but I love you all. You all take a special place in my heart. Those of you who aren't in the chat room, but just watching and just listening, I appreciate you too. I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight, and we'll get into something else tomorrow. We'll see tomorrow. I don't even know what yet. So we'll get there. And so, guys, thanks for being here. And if you're not a member, hit the little join button down below and join up. You can become a member of this show. And show is always free. But if you want to be a member, you have a $2, a $5, and a $15 a month that you can donate to the cause here. Helps keep this show alive. So thank you very much. Guys, thanks for being here. You have a good night. Barbie D, I don't know if I saw you earlier. Welcome and good night to you. So, all right, guys, you know what? Live long and prosper. Good night.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.